Welcome to Quality Time with MoreSteam. I am your host, Dan Swartwout. Today, we are joined by Larry Inks, PhD. Larry is a clinical professor of management and human resources at the Ohio State University. Here's what Larry's LinkedIn profile says about him. His specialty areas center around application of human resource initiatives linked back to strategic organizational goals and objectives, including but not limited to organization development and change, human resource planning, performance management systems, selection systems, survey research, training and development, talent management, team effectiveness, etc. We get into that today, including the etc. on Quality Time with MoreSteam. And now my conversation with Larry Inks. Today, we are lucky enough to be joined by Professor Larry Inks, PhD. Dr. Inks joins us from the Ohio State University. Larry, welcome to the show.
Hey, great to be here. Thank you so much.
We are absolutely thrilled to have you here with us today. You've been a professor at Ohio State for about 20 years now?
20 years, don't remind me. It seems like it's been, no, it just seems so fast. It seems so fast. Most of my career prior to that was in industry and then being out here, it just, boy, the days go slow and the years go fast.
They most certainly do. You were in industry, you worked in big companies before you went to Ohio State as a professor. Can you give me a little bit of background on your history before Ohio State?
Yeah, my PhD is in industrial organizational psychology. I went to undergrad at Purdue, graduate school actually here at Ohio State back in the day. And then, I've had talent management leadership roles within PepsiCo, a company called Allied Signal, which bought Honeywell, but they kept the Honeywell name. And then most recently, I ran talent management for Cardinal Health.
The transition from the corporate world to the academic world, how did you make that transition and what was that like?
Well, I had taught once before. I taught at Wichita State University, home of the Shockers.
Yes, excellent college baseball program.
Very good baseball program. Very good baseball program. I was working for Pizza Hut at the time, which was a division of PepsiCo. Probably the best company I worked for, at least, in terms of just the people and the dynamics and the culture. I mean, I loved every place I've worked and all my coworkers, but there was just something special about that time with that business unit within PepsiCo. And my wife at the time was on the faculty at Wichita State. Pizza Hut was moving to Plano, Texas. I had the offer to go, but I had guest lectured out at Wichita State, and they called and made me an offer to join the faculty the night of that the move was announced. And I talked with my boss, the head of HR. We were friends, and they said, "Look, try it. We know that you would like the thought of teaching. Try it, and if you don't like it, come back, try it for a year, and we'll just call it a late relocation." So I really had nothing to lose. So I did that for about 4 years. Really wanted to be doing other things in industry, felt I had not checked off all the boxes yet. So, I called some recruiters back up and got back out in the market and worked for Allied Signal. Got a call from a recruiter on the job at Cardinal Health, which is an exciting opportunity, and was there for about 5 years working with some great folks. And then just, ready to be doing something different. And a couple of folks on my team were working with a couple of OSU faculty on a project, and I went down to the cafeteria to say hello. And one of the folks was the department chair, and he said, "We're going to have an open faculty position if you're interested." And, I was ready to be doing something different. And so I said, "Yeah, well, let me think about that." Then I went out and interviewed for it and got it. And that was 20 years ago. So,
I have to say, Larry, this is the first time in all the times we've been doing the show that I've been able to drop this fun fact about myself. I met my wife while we both were working at Pizza Hut.
oh, really? Okay, nice.
Yeah, we were working at the Pizza Hut at the corner of Lane and
Like
and
North Star.
North
Yeah.
Star, right? Lane and North
Lane and
Star,
North Star.
right,
I remember it well because I went in grad school. I would go in there. Yeah, right next to the old Sun TV.
right next to the old Sun TV, which is where my family bought its first VCR way back in
Yep.
the day.
Yeah, we're dating ourselves, my friend. We don't need to be doing this.
Larry, what got you interested in helping people and organizations grow through leadership development?
For me, it's understanding the importance of leadership, I mean, at all levels, right? When I
Mhm.
think about leadership, I mean, you can certainly conceptualize it as, well, you need to have people reporting to you and all that, but really it's about making an impact within the organization. And you can do that at an individual level, you're leading a team, leading a large organization. So to me, it was just understanding and appreciating the importance of those kinds of skills.
You are truly one of the nation's foremost experts on leadership, teams, building teams. When you think about teams that really work well together, what do you see as the key ingredients that set them apart from the teams that just can't seem to click?
There's some interesting research that's been done. In fact, there's a model, a shout out to a person I used to work with, Frank LaFosto at Cardinal Health. Carl Larson and Frank LaFosto have done some interesting work on
Hmm.
what makes teams effective. I mean, there's a ton of different models out there, right? And there's elements that are similar to them, but I'll just reference Frank's model, which I think works really well. And one of the things he talks about is having a clear and elevating goal. Having
Hmm.
a well-articulated, compelling goal that the people on the team can get behind, right? And then it is having the people that have the right kinds of skills, both the technical, but also the soft skills. They talk about that a lot, and we all know that, right? We all have been in situations before where, maybe you've got a team full of wicked smart people, but they're not very good at working with others, right?
Hmm.
And you talk about that link and the difference between human capital, which is at the individual level, and social capital, which is what happens with good teams. That's not a given. That goal, it is having people that have the skills. It's having the willingness to be collaborative. I
Hmm.
think it's also having some standards, agreed upon standards of excellence and accountabilities, and then just talking as a group and making sure everybody understands who's going to be doing what, and then regularly talking about your progress. But I think it's hugely important to have a goal for the team or an objective that is inspirational, that's compelling, that's elevating, that is going to help people retain their enthusiasm and engagement.
You've mentioned now the importance of setting goals.
Hmm.
Could you give us a little background on that? Setting goals, how you set the goal, how you get the team motivated behind the goal. How do you get that buy in once you set that goal?
Well, I think, basic finding in social psychology, and I'm not a social psychologist. Those are other folks. I'm an industrial psychologist, but basic finding in social psychology is participation leads to commitment.
Uh
Right?
huh.
So I think one aspect of it is whenever possible, involve people in the discussion and development and formalization of those goals, right? So that people they feel like they have played a part in crafting what the game plan is going forward. Again, I think it comes down to the compelling nature of the goal. And then also some just thinking about what has everybody got on their plate. I mean,
Hmm.
I've talked about this a lot in the last, I don't know, especially the last year or so, this idea of resilience, and people talk about it. And I talk about it in the context of change. But if you think about, to a certain extent, a team working on some initiative that could fall into the change domain. When I talk with groups, I'll say this, I'll say, okay, how many folks in here would say that most people have a lot of stuff going on in their lives?
Lots of hands raised.
Yeah, absolutely. Aging parents. I'm worried about my kids, trying to get my kids in, I'm worried about them getting into college or what are they going
Hmm.
to be doing? All the health issues. Almost, I could have 80 people in a room. Almost every hand will go up. I
Right.
say, great. In addition to that, all the stuff that everybody's got on their own, we've got societal stuff. We've got global strife and wars. We've got economic issues. We've got people from all sides of the political spectrum in the United States tossing shoes at each other. We've got spy balloons, we've got climate change, we've got so many things, and not to depress the listener. So for those of you who are listening, hopefully you're put a smile back in that face. Uh,
I'll,
but
I'll, I'll
but
edit in some happy music right here, Larry.
yeah,
I'll edit in
do
some
the
happy
happy
music.
music. Yeah, that would be fine. Insert a joke here or there. But my point is that I think when we think about people coming into work, we think they're going to be just all bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, and we're going to have 100% of their energy and engagement. And a lot of people, I think, they're going to work with a lot, not a lot in the tank.
Right.
So part of it for me is also recognizing that for the people on your team, most of those people are probably have their own mountain to climb right now that we're not even aware of.
Hmm.
So I think it's recognizing that we want to do everything we can to engage people through the nature of the project that we're working on and the meaningfulness of it and all that. But it's also on a one-on-one basis, being a good team leader and knowing what your team members are going through and trying to be sensitive to that in a way that allows them to engage fully.
I'm curious about this, and I want to touch upon this a little further because I think you mentioned something very interesting. How do you balance that? Somebody's coming in, they've got major life issues, they've
Hmm.
got things that they're dealing with, but at the same time, the organization still has a goal they need to achieve.
Yeah.
So, how do you balance that, giving that grace, giving that leeway, while also making sure that the work gets done?
Yeah, no, that's a tough thing. A couple of things, I guess. For me, one of them is people have to know what they are qualified to do versus what they should not be trying to do, right? So
Okay.
you've got somebody coming in and they're clearly going through maybe they're going through some marital issues, or you
Hmm.
believe that they are suffering from depression or something like that. That's one where unless you're a trained psychologist, or you've got the training for that, the human inclination might be to really try to work with them and help them through those problems. But those are situations probably where you want to try to refer them to an employee assistance provider or some resources
Okay.
that are available to your organization, right? So I guess where I'm going with this is wherever possible, if you feel like there are some significant issues going on in a person's life, talk with them about it. Talk with them about how if they think it's having an impact on their ability to be engaged and to be committed, and work with them to try to help them seek out that external help. Now, the bottom line is, the work does need to get done.
Hmm.
So you still have to hold people accountable to that. But I think as much as possible, trying to be compassionate and trying to engage people in the process of engaging themselves.
We're talking about leadership, we're talking about management. People often talk about the difference between managing and leading.
Yeah.
How do you see those roles playing out, and why do you think it matters for organizations to have both?
That's interesting. Another interesting question. And, when you think about management skills, at least the way I think about it, I think about there are things like communication skills and planning and
Mhm,
organizing
mhm.
and informing and all those different kinds of things. Managers, I've heard this described before. In fact, an author named John Cotter, shout out to him. He's very well known for talking about the difference between management and leadership. Managers keep the trains running on time, right?
Mhm.
They're good at those management skills. Leadership skills, I think of them as things like strategic thinking, integrative thinking. Can you pull different areas together, inspiring other people, right? And to a certain extent, you could think about leadership helps you figure out where the tracks need to be laid. Management helps you keep the trains running on time, right? If you That's one way to think about it. Now, what interesting thing, and I'll try to be a tricky presenter at times, and I'll lay out this difference, and I'll ask an audience, so which of these is most important? And they kind of stew on it a little bit, and then they usually say, well, both of them are important. I say absolutely. The
Right.
key is knowing when to be demonstrating and using management skills, when to be demonstrating leadership skills. I say every great leader, if you think about John F. Kennedy, Martin Luther King Jr., there were times when they clearly were displaying management skills, but there were
Mhm.
also times when they were displaying leadership skills.
Being authentic as a leader, that's something people talk about, and that sounds great, but it can be tough, right? In the real world, how can leaders stay true to their values when they're under pressure or facing some big changes? That's got to be tough to be a leader in those kinds of
Yeah.
circumstances.
I'm a big believer in introspection. It's not
Mhm.
easy to do sometimes, but I think it's a lot easier to remain committed to your values, especially in the gray areas, when you're actually aware of them, when you've thought about what they are. Now, your values drive you, they drive your behavior. You may not be consciously aware of what your values are, and you may act in a way that is inconsistent with them. And then maybe that's manifested by some feelings that you feel like, well, maybe I didn't do the right thing here, or you're a little
Mhm.
troubled, or I'm not sure why I feel uncomfortable about what I just did. But it could be because you have an awareness that you're maybe acting in a way that's in opposition or that's contrary to your values. So I think a big part of this is giving it some thought. What
Mhm.
are your core values? What are the things that drive you? What are the things that you'd be willing to get fired for?
Mm.
That's when you find out what your values are, is when you are pressure tested. But to me, a big part of that is thinking about what are your values, what are the things that, and how do they influence your behavior? I want to say, and I don't mean to keep name dropping, but I want to err in the side of giving people credit where I've seen things like it's an author named Clayton Christensen who I think
Uh-huh.
said it's easier to remain consistent with your values 100% of the time than 99% of the time. because
Mm,
once you start slipping, it becomes easier to go on further. I've heard this described a little bit as the broken window analogy in a house, right?
right,
One of your windows is broken, you don't fix it. Well, it's a lot easier for when something else goes wrong, you don't fix it. And pretty soon
right.
you've got a house that's pretty beat up. So again, I think it's, being aware of what your values are, how do those impact your behavior? What are the situations under which they are threatened or challenged? And then just trying to remain committed to them.
That is a really interesting thought because I can think about that in my own life. I have a challenge to keep my desk relatively clean,
Good
not a
luck with
lot of
that one.
clutter. Right.
Yeah,
Not a
right.
lot of clutter, but then one paper's on it, then two, then three, then all of a sudden there's 10, and that clutter just builds quickly. But when I keep it clean, it doesn't build.
Yes. And I think this could also apply potentially to one of the most American institutions out there, and that is the junk drawer. And I say that because everybody I know has a junk drawer. The folks that
Right.
are listening, I'm guessing you got a junk drawer. It's probably in
Uh
your
huh.
kitchen, and in that junk drawer is the keys to the locks that you don't have anymore. Maybe an old laminated Blockbuster card that's back in the back, paper clips, binder, right? But that's how junk drawers start out, and they continue to accumulate things.
I remember going through a junk drawer once, Larry, and I found a coupon for a pizza restaurant that had closed 7 years
Oh
earlier.
yeah, yeah, absolutely.
So
It's like an
that's
archaeological expedition. You get in there and you find things. There's previous civilizations that you find in your.
one of the things you talk a lot about in your work is change and
Mhm.
making changes happen, and that's a conversation in the world of continuous improvement as well. So many change efforts just don't stick. You try
Yeah,
something and it just doesn't happen. In
yeah.
your experience, what tends to trip organizations up, and what can leaders do to actually make change last?
Yeah, that's a great question. You hear percentages, things like 75% of change initiatives fail to yield the outcomes that they were hoping for, right? Which is a
Right,
large number.
right.
And, when I talk about this, I say, by the way, the ones that fail are not the change initiatives like, hey, everybody's getting a pony, hope everybody can deal with it, right? You don't, so they're the ones that are the challenging ones. I think, yeah, so what makes them work? I think one thing is recognize that it's going to take more time than you think it's going to take,
Right.
right? I mean, I use a lot of metaphors and analogies, and when I talk about change, I say, how many people in here have cleaned out a garage? And most
Mm,
people have, whether it's your own garage or your parents' garage, whatever it is. Like, what's that process like? And they say it's ugly, of course, and it gets worse before it gets better. In my experience, that's what change is like. It's going to get
mhm.
worse before it gets better. Okay. If you expect every day to be better than the day before it, then your expectations may not be met and it may not be realistic. Now, maybe, but in my experience, it's pretty choppy. If it's two steps forward and one step back, that's still okay. The other thing is, give it time. Let it take
Mhm.
the time that it's gonna take, we'll hear people say, I've been around people say, "Well, most organizations would take 6 months to do this, initiative, and we're gonna get it done in 4 months." And I'm like, "No, we're gonna get it done in 9 months just like everybody else," that kind of thing. So, let it take the time,
Mhm.
and then I think a big part of this is the prep work as well, okay? And so again, I not to be too, metaphor and analogy kinda oriented, but, I ask
I
people.
love them.
Okay, well, good. So here's another
Yeah,
one. Have you done any painting? You done any like painted interior wall, exterior wall, anything like
I
that?
have. I have. Unfortunately, it's one of my least favorite activities.
Okay, and I get that. Tell me the importance of the prep work. How important is the prep work?
Oh my gosh, you better make sure that you've got mats laid down or you'll get paint on the
Yep,
floor. If you
yep,
don't tape off edges, you're going to get paint where it's not supposed
that's
to
right.
be.
Yep,
If you're
you
not wearing the proper clothing, you're going to get paint all over your
great.
clothes. You might get
Yep,
it in your eye if you don't have the proper eye protection.
yep,
You got to
yep.
do a lot of prep
Okay,
work.
and so that's right. And you thought that hole in the drywall that you patched, you thought you'd sanded that down so that you couldn't see it. It's fun to get rolling on paint, right? That's a lot of it's the more fun part of the job, but some people actually like it. But you know
My
what?
wife does.
Right, but then you look at this and you say, "Well, you know what? I can still see that patch." Or I got paint on the carpet. Now I'm gonna have to go back and take more time to do that. I think a change is a lot like that. The prep work is so important. Think
Mhm.
about what are the answers to questions like, what's the answer to the "what's in it for me" question? You know, if you were to
Right.
ask, what do people in different parts of the organization, what are they going to, how are they going to respond to that question? What's in it for me? What are the losses that they're likely to experience? What's the resistance they're likely to show? You know, I mean, so much of that prep work up front and things like the losses that they are likely to feel, they may seem insignificant to you, but they could be very real and very powerful for people. And I've seen tangible losses, I've seen intangible losses.
Hmm.
I've seen people that, you know, I'm losing a window. I'm going from one office with a huge window to one that's got a smaller window. I've also
Right.
known people that they're feeling like I used to know how important my job was and now I don't anymore. Maybe a potential loss of meaning. So the prep
Hmm.
work and change is very, very important. And it's thinking about things like, are people dissatisfied with the way things are now? You know, is there a compelling sense or is there a sense of urgency going forward? You know, the other thing is, again, there's a number of different models out there. Folks are probably familiar with ADKAR. You might have heard about that,
Hmm.
or John Cotter's model. I mean, there's a number of different ones. Those are two big ones. Cotter, in particular, talks about the importance of having consensus in the senior leadership team. As I
Right.
recall in one of his books, he says if you don't have about 75% of senior leaders bought off and committed to the change, don't even start, which is not good news. So if you've got some, you know, you've got one or two of your leaders that have a pet project and there's some change initiative, and the other members of the leadership team are not bought off on it, that's already starting from a tough spot.
You mentioned in your last answer people dealing with change, and change can be emotional for people.
Hmm.
So, how do you work through that? How do you help people work through that emotional side of the big changes, the big transitions, or even,
Yeah,
like you said, maybe the
yeah,
little changes and little transitions?
yeah. I found a model. You know, I used to kind of deal with this on my own. Then I ran across some work by a guy named William Bridges, and a lot of folks
Okay.
might be familiar with this. And again, you know, I want to make sure that I'm giving credit to people that have done some interesting work here. Bridges talks about this idea of transitions. If you think about change as something that organizations go through, and
Uh
change
huh.
starts with the beginning. We're changing to this new system. We're changing to this. We're moving from this town to this town. That kind of thing. And one of the things I believe, I should have said this up front, I believe that organization change is really collective individual change. There's no magic wand you're going to wave over an organization to make the change happen, right? It is collective individual change, which means we need to understand the psychological experience of change that people go through, and which is basically transitions. And that's what William Bridges talks about. He says, and if you're familiar with Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's model of stages of grief, you know, there's denial,
Mm-hmm.
or I think it's shock, and then denial and anger and bargaining, and then
Acceptance and
right.
all that.
The
Yep.
idea being that you go through a cycle, a series of
Mm-hmm.
emotions, qualitatively different emotions. That's what Bridges talks about. He says there's an endings phase where, you know, there's sense of loss and you got negative emotions, and there's this neutral zone where you're kind of in between. I think of it as like, you know, you've left the harbor that you're very familiar with, and now you're in the open ocean, and that may not be a really pleasant place to be, but then you're seeing this new harbor coming up on the horizon, and he calls that the beginnings phase. And there's emotions that are characteristic, qualitatively different emotions, but more positive emotions, obviously, with new beginnings. And the idea is that it is normal and healthy for people to feel these emotions, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I when I talk about change, I use Bridges' model. I, of course, give him credit, and I say our job in leading change is very much that of a shepherd. You want to allow them to feel the emotions they need to feel to move through this process, but you want to kind of keep them moving along, right? And
Right.
here's the thing, one interesting thing I think you asked before about what can you do to help facilitate change? We have a huge impact over the flow of people through that. For
Mm-hmm.
example, if you've asked the question before you even started, is there a compelling answer to the what's in it for me question for people? Can we articulate why we need to be doing this? You know, have we thought about what potential losses are? Have we listened to people that are displaying some resistance, that have some concerns? You know, because up front, I will tell you, resistance, I don't think is necessarily a bad thing. If you look
Right.
at resistance as a form of feedback, what does it have to tell you? Right? Now, of course, later on, you have to deal with it. But
Mm-hmm.
my point is that when you think about those different things, if you took all those into account, you could find that people progress through that endings phase in that neutral zone more quickly. Conversely, if you say, well, I'm not going to bother trying to explain why we're doing this, I'm going to tell people, I'm going to tell you to jump and you're going to be asking me how high. You don't bother with
Hmm.
any of the what's in it for me question. You don't bother thinking about that. Well, don't be surprised if people stay rooted on in the endings phase for a long time. So that's a to me, that's a really important takeaway with change is that
Hmm.
we can impact, how much resistance do we see in this situation? How quickly do people get through this by the actions that we take and by the prep work that we do? That's why all this stuff hangs together.
Larry, I wanted to ask you something because you got me thinking with your answer just now. One of the things that's been talked about in the last few years is the idea of quiet quitting. You're
Yeah.
familiar with that, right?
Yes. Uh-huh. Yeah.
Is there ever like a quiet resistance to change that's
Oh,
almost
yeah.
analogous to
I,
quiet quitting? And how do you recognize that and deal with that?
people just dragging their feet.
Uh-huh.
You can see this, I think, in organizations where change has not been successful in the past. Let's suppose, just hypothetically, we got an organization where we tried to make certain kinds of change happen in the past. It's not really happened, and people are already pretty cynical. And
Okay.
along comes somebody else who's, eager and very optimistic and says this would be great for the organization, and it could be great for the organization. But for whatever reason, people are not bought off on it, or they just don't like the idea, or they feel like they're going to lose some power within the organization, or they don't trust the person. I mean, there's lots of reasons why people would resist. But one easy thing to do is just drag your feet,
Hmm.
right? I mean, and then maybe try to wait the person out. And maybe this change initiative will go the way of the other ones that, the five previous ones. It'll just wither in the vine and eventually die. And that's why, again, that's part of that 70% probably. That's why the 30%, when you talk about the 25 or 35% of change initiatives that succeed, I think it probably does have a lot of the elements we talked about, right? There is a sense of urgency or a burning platform or dissatisfaction with the present, however you wanna frame that. I think it's also that there is a vision for something better, right? But
Hmm.
most models of change have as a core element to them some vision of a desirable future that people want to be a part of, right?
Hmm.
And I think it's just doing some of the basics. It's the planning work and it's the upfront work and knowing what you're walking into. And then do we have some consensus across the leadership team?
One of the biggest topics in the area of the workforce and employment over the last few years has been remote work versus the concept of return to office.
Right,
Do you have any
right.
thoughts on that? I mean, this is your field,
Yeah. Oh
and this
yeah.
is like the hottest topic there is
Yeah.
right
Oh
now.
yeah. Well, there's AI too, right? I mean, we got all
Well,
kinds of
that's
things.
yeah,
No, we're
yeah.
juggling hot topics. I mean, this is like Disney World for an industrial psychologist. I mean, post-COVID world. Now it's presented some challenges, but it's
It's
like,
not a
think
small
about it.
world after all.
No, it's not. I mean, what does team effectiveness look like? We
Uh-huh.
had 10 people that were all working together 5 days a week, and now four of them are at home 100% of the time, and two of them were hybrid. They're in 3 days a week, and three others or four others are coming in full time. It starts to get complex. So I'm going to go back to this idea we talked about before, I alluded to human capital and social capital. Human capital
Mhm.
is what each of us bring to the party, right? At an individual level, our intellect, sense of humor, personality, drive, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? Social
Mhm.
capital is what happens when people come together, right?
Mhm.
Organizational culture is a social capital construct. You could think about creativity as an individual human capital construct. Innovation is a social capital construct. You know where I'm going. See where I'm going with that. So,
Yep,
uh, you know,
absolutely.
team effectiveness would be one as well. This is something I think has been at the heart of a lot of decision making, even if it has not been well articulated in the last couple of years. People will talk
Mhm.
about, well, we need everybody back in the office because of all the little interactions that happen and the micro mentoring moments and the hallway conversations, the spontaneous things that would not happen if we had an innovation hour by Zoom on Thursdays from 4 to 5, right? And so
Right.
to me, it's important. In fact, what I've said before is organizations need to identify the social capital that drives value within their organization. Understand what that social capital is that drives value, and then you cannot afford to lose that. And I only
Mhm.
mention that because, I've seen some organizations just say, well, we're just going to allow people to work 3 days a week from home. I mean, it seems to almost be just, just off the cuff kinds of decision making. Or they'll say, we're going to let individual managers decide, and when you hear people say, well, I can do my work from home. Well, they may be able to do their work from home, but the question is, do the social capital needs of the organization suffer as a result of that? And that's why I'm thinking, and I've talked about this idea. I want to pursue it a little bit more about social capital mapping, right? You've got value stream mapping, and how do you understand where value is? How do you map out the social capital in an organization so that you can identify where it is in all different parts of the organization? And then I'm not a Luddite. If you can use technology for that, great. But I'll give you a quick example.
Mhm.
I think call centers, to a great extent, there's not a huge social capital need, right? I mean, they're working on their own. Maybe they've got quick access to, tech or support level 2 or whatever. But, that people can be working remotely, and that's probably is okay. But if you think about your favorite TV show, Big Bang Theory, Seinfeld, whatever your generation is, right?
WKRP in Cincinnati. Let's go with that,
WKRP,
Larry.
I thought turkeys could fly. Absolutely. Right? But, and you think about script writers for those shows, they probably need to be in a bullpen
Mhm.
bouncing ideas off of each other, right? The social capital needs are pretty significant there. So it's kind of, to me, it's understanding within your organization, what is the social capital that drives value, and then make sure you don't lose it. And that also, I believe, can help when you are trying to provide an explanation as to why we want people back in the office, or why in this part of the organization we need people back in the office. This part of the organization, yeah, they're working remotely, and here's why. I think in
Mhm.
many cases, you talk about a return to work initiative, or sorry, return to the office, would not return to work, but return to office, right? Because people were working from home. I think where a lot of people fall down is they don't articulate the reasons why. I mean,
Mhm.
they'll say, "Well, we want everybody back in the office starting Monday," and they recognize this is a huge issue, maybe. But think about if you said, "We need to have people back in the office. We want to be clear about the reasoning. Here are the 8 reasons that we realize, drive this decision." People may not be happy with the decision, but they may at least respect the decision making that went into it. And then, if you can allow them some time, we will also recognize this is significant change. We're giving everybody 30 days. We're going to ask you over the
Okay.
next course of the next 30 days to, go out and buy new clothes, whatever you need to be doing, establish the new habits. But then 30 days from now, we'd like to have people back in the office. Right. But I mean, treating them with respect, explaining the reasons why. But I think that's a big part of it, is understanding social capital versus human capital, and then really making sure that you don't lose the value that the social capital can bring.
Larry,
Long-winded answer. I'm sorry about that, but you asked me and you got me going. So
I get it, Larry. Sometimes you just get really excited about a topic. Like me, I'm really excited about this short break. MoreSteam's enterprise process improvement platform includes the tools, training, and software you need to transform your organization into a problem-solving powerhouse. Join the ranks of Fortune 500 companies that trust MoreSteam for their enterprise process improvement. Our integrated approach featuring training, project tracking and execution, simulations, and statistical analysis empowers your team to create a culture where structured problem solving becomes second nature. Visit moresteam.com to learn more. And now back to my conversation with Larry Inks. Larry, this has been an absolutely fascinating conversation. I thank you so much. I have to say, knowing that you are at The Ohio State University makes me even prouder to be a two-time graduate
oh,
of
there you
that
go.
fine institution.
I,
So I
I'm not going
appreciate
to.
everything you're doing.
No, I appreciate it. I'm happy to have had the chance to talk with you, and I really enjoyed it. And for the listeners out there, I wish them all the best and have a great day. And onward and upward.
Absolutely. Larry, anything we haven't touched upon that you would like to mention?
No, not really. The one thing I guess I would say is that we talk about resilience,
Right.
and a lot of the folks listening probably are going through some challenge, or they're having a tough day or whatever it would be.
Mm-hmm.
And when you look at, how do you build your own resilience? I mean, there are some things I think that are important. If I could just mention this really quick. And
Yes,
it's things
please.
like, even if it freaks you out, I think it's not a bad idea to make a list. Understand what's going on in your life that's causing you stress, because you may not be consciously aware of it, but it probably is impacting you. So write
Mm-hmm.
things down, so it's less uncertain, because I think uncertainty is stressful. Use your social networks. I'll do this with a group. In fact, more recently, I've been talking about this as part of change. Have 80 people in a room. How many people in here would say they've got a really good support network? Almost every person raises their hand.
Right.
Great. How many folks in here would say you use that network as much as you should? Almost every
Yep.
hand goes down. So
Mm-hmm.
seek out other people. Let other people help you. I think people want to help, and
Mm-hmm.
and be there for other people. I think it's also things like, know your boundaries. I have a hard time saying no. I think probably a lot of the folks that are listening, the same boat. If you're an achievement-oriented person, you want to be helping out,
Right.
know what your limits are, and be willing to say no, and then take care of yourself. That's the other
Mm-hmm.
thing. A lot of folks are pretty hard on themselves. I am. A lot of the listeners are as well. You know what? We're not perfect. Nobody is. Don't be too hard on yourself. Practice some self-compassion, and then just take it day by day. And then the thing is, if we are building our own resilience, here's the thing. If we are building our own resilience, it gives us the ability to help other people develop theirs.
Outstanding. Larry Inks, thank you so very much. This has been a
Thank you.
truly phenomenal conversation. And I hope you will come back and join us again
I
because
would love
you have
to.
so much to share, so many fascinating topics that you can cover. Thank you, Larry Inks. Appreciate it so very much. Thank you for not saying no to this.
Oh, no, I was happy to do it, but you understand what I'm saying. Yeah, but it was fun. This is always
Absolutely.
fun. Always
Absolutely.
fun to always fun to talk about stuff like this. I've got a lot of passion for it, and just enjoy working with people. So
Thank you, Larry.
thank you, Daniel. Take care.
And thank you for listening to Quality Time with MoreSteam. You can email the show at qualitytime@moresteam.com. And if you enjoyed the show, please leave a rating or review on your favorite podcast service. Also, please go ahead and visit our website, moresteam.com, to learn about the software and tools that can help you solve problems, eliminate waste, and do things better. We'll be back in 2 weeks with more Quality Time with MoreSteam. Thanks again.